Hi, everyone. Mindshare Partners published a report on the state of workplace mental health for older workers. With me today is Susan Wile Schwarz, Head of Programs at the Global Coalition on Aging and Managing Director at High Lantern Group. Thanks for joining us, Susan.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us, what have you seen in your work with older workers as it pertains to mental health and well-being?
Thanks. That's a great question. There have been so many strides recently in elevating mental health, both in and around the workplace, but there is still a real divide in terms of, behavior, awareness, and access among different generations. On balance, older adults are really far less likely than their younger colleagues to identify, talk about, and then in particular to access mental health supports. But they are definitely dealing with challenges, whether it's from managing chronic health conditions and oftentimes multiple conditions, to anxiety about their readiness for retirement, financially or emotionally, to providing care to a spouse, which we know can be a huge source of both physical and emotional strain. And these challenges aren't necessarily unique to older workers. I mean, honestly, I check a lot of these boxes myself, but they do require particular awareness on the part of employers that, just because their older workers may be less likely to talk about it or ask for help, doesn't mean it isn't happening. And I think on a bright side, there are real and tangible strategies that make a difference. In addition to some of the explicit mental health supports we're seeing, we can also tackle some of those upstream causes by empowering employees to stay healthy in the first place. And I think, this is really, really powerful, whether that's through gym incentives or on-site vaccine clinics and policies like flexible work arrangements that give employees the trust and the space to do what they need to do, both at work and at home.
Fantastic. And you've already named that there's been kind of substantial and usually positive change around mental health. And we've seen employers kind of lean into these kinds of supports already, especially in the past decade. You've also been with Coalition now, I think, for around a decade, give or take. Can you tell me what's changed in the space or for older workers or even the world since you started your work there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is changing a lot. It has changed a lot. First of all, the workplace has more age diversity than ever before. And I think, even across the last decade, we have seen, looking across OECD countries, including the US, more than half of adults aged 60 to 64 are still working. And nearly a third of people aged 65 to 69, so over that traditional retirement age, are also employed, which is a pretty major development. And these numbers are increasing each year. Um, as a result, older adults now represent a greater share of the total workforce than ever before. And a growing body of research is showing that, this greater age diversity in the workforce and, in particular, retaining that senior knowledge and insight can provide real advantages for employers in terms of gains in innovation and creativity and across economies. So, IMF research suggests that improvements in health and workforce participation among older adults could add up to zero point 0.4 percentage points to global GDP growth each year. So this makes it even more important for employers to be thinking about, like, how do we support that whole health picture for our older workers? And I mean, we have these longer, healthier lives. We say this at GCOA all the time. Like, this is one of the great mega trends of the 21st century, but it's also hitting up like against other mega trends you may have heard of, like the explosive growth in new technologies. AI is getting a lot of attention, and it can be a real driver of anxiety for workers of all ages. As employers are racing to adopt new technology, they need to pay special attention to making sure they're bringing older workers along in terms of upskilling and not just focusing on younger employees for whom these technologies may be native.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is an aging workforce isn't just a cost, it's an investment with actual and real and tangible returns, in addition to this kind of global and moral imperative, really. So, for the practical, and you've already named employers investing in kind of resources and strategies that empower workers. What
Mhm.
else do you see as most important to supporting the mental health and well-being of older workers in today's economy?
So I think, it really is some of those things that we've talked about already. So it's sort of meeting older adults where they are, recognizing that this kind of one size fits all approach isn't necessarily going to be effective. Older workers, as I mentioned, they can be a really hard to reach population in terms of mental health supports. Many of these workers are managing those pressures we talked about related to their health, to caregiving, and to financial demands, including, rising cost of living and fear about retirement savings. It is hard out there. Stress and instability can have a real negative effect on your ability to deliver your best at work. And I think that's something we all are starting to understand, which is why we're seeing this new attention to workplace mental health. And, so reaching older workers with support that is both tailored and relevant to them is really the best way to start bridging the gap for this group, which is, I think, overwhelmingly being under-supported on the mental health side. And this includes recognizing, older workers may not see themselves in HR messaging they receive about mental health needs or supports. And that supporting their mental health can also look like, those things we talked about, like financial advising to improve longevity literacy, which is, that long range planning to understand what your costs are going to be like if you live to 90 or 100 and may have care needs at some point along the way. Or sharing information about how getting, vaccinated against the flu can help protect against a heart attack. This is really important, and I think it ladders back up to the mental health picture. And, outside of health, other promising strategies include, flexible and phased retirement. So allowing people to work longer, even if it looks a little different than that 40 or 50-hour work week we're so used to. And then I mentioned this before, and I can't overstate it, is caregiving policies, explicit support for caregivers. We know that when up against a wall, employees will choose their family every time. And that's a good thing. Employers then have an opportunity to take this knowledge and help their employees be able to show up for their families while staying in the workforce if they want or need to as they grow older. And I think, at the end, like that's a really great flex and just, further evidence of how much opportunity there is here for employers to, as you kind of mentioned, to meaningfully support their employees while still staying fully aligned with their business goals.
Yeah, I really like that you named that there are almost ripple effects. You're not just supporting the individual worker, but also their
Mhm.
families and their communities. And so many health issues too are intersectional. And also this notion of tailoring, and it's not a one size fits all because older workers have had decades to experience life, and with that comes a huge diversity of experiences and wants and needs. So with that, thank you so much for your time, Susan. For our viewers, you can download Mindshare Partners report on older workers' mental health using the link in the comments or description section below. Thank you all for watching, and thank you, Susan, for spending your time with us today.
Thank you.